Okay, Annette, you are good to go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Annette Oltmans. Welcome to this month's training intensive, When Helping Heals, Simple Steps for Responding to Abuse. Last month, we talked about double abuse. So to learn more about double abuse, please feel free to visit our website and click on the video. Since we learned the many ways those of us responding to a victim's disclosure of abuse can actually harm them, we wanted to share some ways that you can prevent double abuse by instead providing compassionate and healing responses. The MEN Project is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to educating, equipping, and restoring all those impacted by abuse. We do our best to fulfill this mission by providing education and training on understanding and learning to identify, particularly emotional abuse, defining and learning to prevent double abuse, and many other matters related to these topics. I want to start by telling you a little bit about my story, not to focus on me because my story is not unique. In the hundreds of victims that I interviewed, they shared very similar stories to mine. In my story with covert emotional abuse, which is the confusing manipulative behaviors that are hard to identify, it's not the same as overt emotional abuse. I was married for 15 years. The ongoing and relentless covert behaviors that by my husband caused me to be profoundly confused, traumatized. I developed post-traumatic stress disorder, and the prolonged high level of stress that was, consistently sustaining caused me to become physically ill as well. When I knew I could no longer preserve my health and my emotional well-being, I finally found the courage to step out of couples therapy, which we had been in for an extended period of time without getting the proper help that we needed. I separated from my husband, and then I reached out to people who I assumed would be safe. My couples Bible study leaders of 14 years. They had regularly taught marriage classes, and they perceived themselves and projected themselves to be experts in the field of marriage. So I naturally thought they were experts. I soon came to realize that they were not safe. They had little knowledge of what a healthy relationship should look like because their focus was on wives submitting to their husbands. My husband and I engaged in years of therapy, but it had failed to identify the problems in our marriage. And this is a common problem that occurs in so many, that has occurred in so many victims that I interviewed. Therapy was actually very traumatizing, and I had become exhausted by it and very weary. I thought if we could find a qualified accountability partner for my husband, then there could be transparency and integrity, which was lacking on his part in therapy. And that maybe then my husband would be confronted and not be able to continue with the manipulating behaviors that were confusing the therapists that we had seen. I actually said to my couples Bible study leader that I would do anything if he would do that one thing. And when I say that, I just want to develop that a little bit. I had tried everything. I had tried being softer, more loving. I had tried setting firm boundaries. I had tried a myriad of different attempts to reach my husband and have us have an authentic and respectful mutual relationship. But everything I tried failed because nothing a victim can do is going to change their abuser. It is up to the abuser to change him or herself. When I was speaking with the female leader of our Bible study, rather than believe me and listen to what I was trying to desperately communicate, I was interrupted. She would constantly interrupt me. I was blamed, like she would imply that I wasn't being a good wife, or she would redirect the conversation. Well, have you tried that? She interrupted me and took over the conversation, speaking down to me. and redirecting and offering advice that I wasn't asking for. I simply wanted to share my dilemma and my story. Excuse me. She and her husband actually went so far as to give me ultimatums. They told me that if I wasn't back in couples therapy within 90 days, I would never be invited back into this group that I had been a regular member of for 14 years. So they took a position of condemnation as opposed to compassion. And that's what we're going to talk about today. My illness, which they were very well aware of, I had a very low white blood count. It was dangerously low, and doctors couldn't explain why. I had developed latent autoimmune diabetes, and these were all unexplained illnesses that were really impacting my body. I lost a significant amount of weight. I was in a very weakened position. The harsh response that I received by them was very traumatizing, because they were now going to eliminate me from a group that I had socialized with, traveled the world with on mission trips, and become a part of my extended church family, my home church. I was actually shocked, because the disparity between what I hoped would occur was met with not just apathy, but the opposite. They were expressing aggression towards me. They killed, I'm so sorry. Sorry about that. They killed my hope to finally find a solution that may help my husband see his behaviors as being harmful and help me heal emotionally and physically. I was asking very little, and yet their responses interfered with the proper intervention that I was seeking. And their interference actually unnecessarily and significantly prolonged the journey towards healing and restoration. As responders, when we kill hope, we send victims into a downward spiral of recurring trauma, anxiety, depression, and so forth. And my story, like I said, is not unique. What I noticed in my research and interviews with hundreds of victims is this: what I call double abuse is very common. Almost every victim had experienced a myriad of similar experiences by those whom they had sought help, whether it was family members, friends, coworkers, or people in positions of authority, like their HR department if it was taking place at work, or their pastor at a church. And they expressed that this added layer of abuse was even more harmful to them than the original abuse that they had encountered. They wanted to talk more about the double abuse than the original abuse, because that was the most traumatizing experience for them. The healing model of compassion became a staple to the founding of the Men Project in order to prevent double abuse from happening and to create safe spaces for victims and survivors to share their stories of abuse. Today, I will go through 3 steps from the healing model of compassion. The full healing model of compassion looks like this, and you can find it on our website, and it will be downloaded into our chat box. But today, like I said, we're going to focus on just a few of the most pivotal steps. You can also learn the in-depth version of the healing model of compassion through our 4-hour introductory training and in our 7-session comprehensive training. Our next introductory training will be held on April 28th and 29th from 10 to noon Pacific Standard Time. And to attend these, please go to our website at themenproject.com, sign up and receive notice of upcoming trainings, and you will be sent a link. Okay, so when will you be called to respond to abuse? All of us will likely be responders of abuse at one point or another in our lives, because we are mothers, we are fathers, sisters, brothers, friends, coworkers, or working in volunteer positions at organizations or faith-based communities. Or when you observe a friend or a family member or a colleague that is that it's likely that they're in an abusive situation, you may then want to have the tools to respond. When victims come to you, it's really important to know that they are coming to you from a position of anticipatory fear. They are likely only going to tell you a little bit of what's going on. And it might seem like they're telling you a lot, but trust me, there's so much more to the story, because victims test the waters before they fully disclose all that is happening. And they see, they're attempting to see if you will be safe. They're hoping desperately that you will help them either with an intervention or just with a good listening ear and support, just someone who they can feel validated and connected with. So when a victim comes to you for help because they are seriously struggling in their relationship, they also may not even know that they are being abused. They may not have yet identified it as abuse. So this is another thing to seriously consider when you're interfacing with victims. So how will you respond? Excuse me. The first step in the healing model of compassion is to listen. Now, why is this so important? Common mistakes that people make that stop them from listening are, let me just give you a few. We might be uncomfortable learning or talking about abuse. It might feel overwhelming to us because we don't know enough about abuse. But the healing model, even if you don't want to become an expert on abuse, the healing model will help you with simple responses that if you stay in the box of the healing model, at least you will not do further harm. And once you learn the healing model, you will find that it is much easier to implement than what your prior ideas were about what you needed to do, because we really need to do very little. Other reasons that we don't listen well is that we feel bad and we interrupt what they're saying. We know the person's partner maybe, and we are having a problem believing that that partner would harm a victim. So we don't believe. We don't really understand covert abuse, the confusing manipulative behaviors and the psychological gaslighting and so forth that comes along with emotional abuse. And some of the things that you hear sound like stuff that happens in non-abusive relationships. You might not recognize the severity of it because it seems so elusive. But for a victim who finally speaks out, like I said, there's probably so much more to the story. And it's probably so much more prolific than you can imagine. Or we assume that the person is seeking advice, that we need to offer advice when we really don't need to do that. Or we want desperately for them to get out of the situation. So we think we need to give them a lot of shoulds or do's or don'ts. Or maybe we desperately want them to stay in the situation, and we do the same. We should all over them. And that is actually very harmful. So what actually happens for the victim when we close our mouth and listen without saying anything is this: they finally experience care. They experience compassion and they experience concern. I'm so sorry for the noise, you guys. I don't know why that's going off in this room. I normally don't have it in here, but so I'm sorry. So we want to express compassion. That is what a victim is desperately seeking. And there's a fine line between compassion and condemnation. I'm sure that my Bible study leaders thought they were doing the right thing. They were attempting to drive me back into couples therapy because they thought that would keep me engaged in the marriage. But every way that they attempted to do that was condemning, judgmental, disbelieving, and very harmful, and it had a very traumatizing effect on me. So we want to do things that make victims feel heard. We want them to receive validation. We want their anxiety or their adrenaline to calm as they speak and as we listen, without objecting or giving them the impression that we don't believe them. We provide them a safe space for the victim to process out loud what they're experiencing. Like I said in my story, I was so confused and I needed a safe space to process what I was experiencing, a safe person that would listen and just allow me to explain everything that was happening, because explaining it and talking it out loud with a safe person actually helps the victim process and reach the point of clarity in their situation. They're likely very confused, and this process allows them to finally feel that they are not at fault or they are not alone. When the victim is done talking, lead them to our website and the terms and definitions. I want to show you, we have this that you can get available, but we have multiple terms and definitions that describe covert emotionally abusive behaviors. We have many more. This is a handout that we provide in our training, excuse me. But we have many more on our website that really helps a victim realize that what they are experiencing is harmful, it's destructive to the relationship, and it gives them the clarity to find the language to describe their experiences. So how do you listen well? Well, we listen well by having our body language. Now, I remember when I spoke to my Bible study group, she sat there almost tense, just waiting to interject and interrupt me. She wasn't calm. She didn't put her hand on my arm or on my back or comfort me and have a posture of listening. So we want to have a posture of listening, of eye contact, and of deep connection. And we also can provide that in our facial expressions. We want to be calm. We want to be concerned. We want to show them that we love and care for them. And we want to mirror back. If we're going to speak, you mirror back what you're hearing. So you might say, what I hear you saying is this or that. Is that correct? And that shows the victim that you are truly listening to them. You don't want to interrupt them. You don't want to give them advice. You just want to have a closed mouth and really work on deepening the process of listening. And then the next step that we're going to talk about today is to believe them. We want to believe that the story is true. But what happens, and it's a strange phenomenon, but what happens in many, many stories when abuse victims finally speak out is that we don't want to believe it's true. We view the speaker, the victim, as troublemaking. They're complaining, they're hypersensitive, and so forth. And we can't imagine that this spouse of theirs, who we've seen in a very different light, could possibly be a very different person at home. So we doubt them. And we deliver this in our body language, in our words, and in our facial expressions. So we want to believe them. Statistics tell a very different story. In sexual assault cases, 97%, in a study that was done, 97% of people who came forward about sexual assault were determined to be true. So only 3% of victims lie. So it's really important to come first from a posture of believing them. By not believing a victim, we actually highly traumatize them. It's a form of double abuse. You do not need to know the truth of the matter to act as if it's true. If it is untrue, believe me, it will come out in time. But we want to first come at a posture of believing them, because at least then we do not do further harm. No one is harmed by believing the story to be true. Types of responses we see when the responder does not really believe abuse happens or happened to the individual can be really traumatic. We might say, gosh, I just can't believe that. I just, we express ways that doubt them, or we interrupt by saying, well, have you tried cooking dinner every night and having sex or something really off base like that? But trust me, this is what happens so often when victims are trying to tell their story and how they are discounted or minimized, or they'll say something Pollyanna like, well, I'm sure you'll work it out. well, that's not really listening. We're just dismissing them then. It's a form of apathy. Types of responses we can expect when they do is, like in an organization, they will exercise due diligence. So let's say a person goes to their HR department because of sexual harassment. A healthy organization will do their due diligence to get to the bottom of what happened. And they will take the necessary steps to immediately protect the victim from further harm. But so often this is not the case. They are diminished and they are not believed. And I can tell you hundreds of stories of where you think it's a professional organization, but they just give preferential treatment to this person in a higher employment position, believing that they are not, it's not possible for them to be carrying out this behavior. So we need to really believe them. Now, the next step is we want to validate them. What is validate? We want to mirror back what you understand. So we really want to make sure we understand what they're saying. And I don't mean to just be rote and just repeat exactly what they said. We want to show them that we are understanding them. And we want to tell them that they have every reason to feel the way that they do. We don't want to minimize them in any way. We want to validate them and say, if this is what you're experiencing, I can understand why you are so upset and why this is so foreboding. You have every reason to feel the way that you do. And like I mentioned earlier, when a victim tells their story, they have tremendous amount, I cannot overemphasize this enough, of anticipatory fear that they won't be believed, understood, or validated. So it's critical to tell them that it's not their fault, that no one deserves to be treated this way, regardless of what they've done, because victims often look for ways to blame themselves. They are so empathic that they take on a lot of the responsibility for both parties in the relationship. And they say, well, if I would do this better, maybe I could do that better. They have a lot of reasons that they blame themselves. They've been so groomed and beaten down in the relationship that they take on responsibility. So we want to tell them that abuse is not a mistake. It is a conscious choice by their abuser, and no one deserves it. There's nothing that they can do that would warrant an abusive reaction. The responsibility for abuse lies solely with the abuser. And when we validate victims, it helps to reduce their anxiety, because they come to you, like I said, with that anticipatory fear. There's a lot of anxiety. And when a victim is experiencing trauma, which they likely have for a significant amount of time, because it takes victims sometimes years to be able to identify what they're experiencing. So they've likely developed post-traumatic stress disorder. And when a victim develops anxiety from a position in post-traumatic stress, then if you add to that anxiety, you are actually adding to trauma, because anxiety in a traumatized victim is actually more trauma. So we want to avoid that. When we validate them, it helps them find clarity, it helps them believe in themselves, it helps them find strength, and it helps to reduce the confusion and self-doubt they are carrying. We are speaking into them, and it helps reduce their self-doubt they are carrying, like I just said. It helps them feel safe, which is a key component to what we hope to provide them. Safety and hope is what we want to give them. Hope that they will be supported, that they will find a way through this. Maybe they will find help for their abuser so that they're able to salvage their marriage that they've invested years in and that they're financially bound to. There's so many factors that make a victim usually really want to try to save their relationship before they take on the added trauma of going through a contentious divorce. So we need to respect the position that we're coming from, and we can actually really give them a strength to set firmer boundaries and to find a pathway through when we validate them. Validating is a process of making a mark in a trauma victim's life. We are fully aligning with them. We are not doubting them. We are not disbelieving them. We are not minimizing their abuse. We're not saying it's not so bad. It's not that severe. We are validating them. We are providing them with the most valued gift of connection. Now, this is really important to note. Connection is what victims need. They need compassion and connection, because so often when victims speak out, they're first responders, and we're all first responders. You know, like I said, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, coworkers. If they confide in us, we are their first responder. And so the gift of connection is exactly what they need, because so often people will pull away and say, gosh, I don't want to talk about this. Or, well, they don't listen to me. You know, I gave him or her advice and they don't listen, so I don't want to talk to that person anymore. Or it's just too uncomfortable, or I don't want to get in the middle. But taking a neutral stand, saying you don't want to get in the middle, actually helps only one person, the abuser. So we really need to commit to a connection. It's really a very simple thing to offer. Willing to talk with them occasionally on the phone, or take a walk with them once a week, something that provides that connection, that listening skill, and that validation. Even the seemingly benign response of apathy and indifference will have a traumatizing effect on the victim. I noticed that when I spoke out, people pulled away from me. I mean, they gave me ultimatums, and they also disparaged me and told other people in our broader Christian community that I wasn't, not, they said, don't talk to her because we want to drive her back into couples therapy. So I actually lost my sense of identity in my community, which made me lose hope that I was ever going to find help. And like I said, their responses interfered with the proper intervention, and it significantly delayed the path towards healthy healing and reconciliation, which my husband and I ultimately did reconcile, but only after we were separated for 3 years. And he went through intensive therapy that took him about 2 years, but their responses delayed his willingness to go into the proper kind of intensive therapy that he needed by more than a year, because they emboldened his faulty thinking. They came around him, they condemned me, and they supported him. And so he felt more than ever that he was right in his attitudes, that I was not being a good wife. And so our responses are very powerful. There's an old saying from the 70s that says, don't give all your power away. Well, people often don't willingly give their power away. Power is taken away from them by others, because we do have power in other people's lives by exercising connection and compassion, or by exercising condemnation. It affects people. And we need to realize, if we're going to be interfacing with a victim, that we truly have the power to help them heal or to add significant trauma. So now I'd like to take a pause. We've gone through those 3 steps of listening, believing, and validating, and see if anyone has any questions.
Okay, Annette, we do have a few questions here. The first question is, how do I talk with someone close to me who I think is in an abusive relationship, but who is not saying they are, and they're not reaching out? So I know that they need help, but they're not asking. What can I do?
Well, when I held up the tool of terms and definitions that quantify what abuse actually looks like, it doesn't have to be physical abuse to be a domestic violence situation. Psychological aggression and control and manipulation are all forms of domestic violence, and they can be very subtle forms of emotional abuse. So what I recommend, and what I have done many times in my career, is to provide what you can do is you go to our website and you can download the terms and definitions for free in PDF form. And you can take that, you can find a clever way to create a conversation and provide that list and it will help the victim on their own from a wellspring inside themselves come to the realization that what they're experiencing is abusive. But you have to understand, emotional abuse is so confusing, so they may have no clue that they're in an abusive situation. They're just viewing it as a complicated, difficult relationship, and they can't quite put their finger on why. So they work extra hard on themselves to try this and to try that. And maybe I'm not communicating effectively. I need to try harder. Maybe I'm unlovable. Maybe I'm just not a good person in a relationship and I'm just not very lovable. They take on all these self-loathing attitudes. So it's important to be subtle. What we like to say is don't over confront. Don't say you're in an abusive situation if they're not ready to hear that. We don't want to over emote. We don't want to over confront, and we don't want to under inform. So we want to provide them information. And so I would recommend using our terms and definitions, finding a way. You might say, gosh, you mentioned this situation with your husband last week, and circle the behavior on the terms and definitions and say, it's like this is what its definition is, and this is how it's explained. Why don't you take a look at the rest of this list and see if there's any other things that you can identify that might help you? And you can just be more subtle and not so confronting, but just provide them with information.
I really like that answer because it's so delicate, Annette. So thank you for explaining that out.
Sure.
We have two questions here. Okay, what if you have personally seen the person claiming to be the victim lashing out at their partner abusively? How do I know this person isn't trying to make the real victim look like the abuser?
Well, I lashed out at my husband when I was going through it. The one place I could lash out was in public. And so it probably didn't do a lot for my how people interpreted me, but it was the one safe place that I could confront. And also, he would do so many manipulative things, and then these subtle things that he would do, he would play out in public where he would maybe undermine me or scapegoat me in a subtle way that I was acutely aware of, and where other people might just pass it off as maybe just a bad moment. But for me, it was layers upon layers upon layers of experiencing this. And so I would react. And it's really, I hear a lot of therapists make this mistake. They say, well, I've seen them both abuse each other. Well, the problem is that the victim tries desperately to communicate in a healthy way, but it falls on deaf ears and it gets reversed on them. They get blame shifted. They're constantly in the downgraded position. And so they develop bad habits to try to respond. They ultimately start using some of the same behaviors on the abuser to it's like, well, if you're going to treat me this way, why don't you see what it feels like to be treated this way? Maybe you will then realize that a healthier way is the way I've been trying to communicate with you. And so I wouldn't jump to conclusions, but it's certainly can't hurt you to, if they are confiding in you, to show them the terms and definitions, try to have them explain it to you. Now, sometimes, like I said, 3% people are lying. It's common for an abuser to believe that the other party is abusing them. My husband thought I was abusing him because I was not fully submitting to his relentless control in all areas of my life. And so if I wasn't fully submitting, then I must be the abuser. I was not falling in line with his defined ideals about what a wife should be. And so it's not uncommon, but you need to take time to really develop that. But it's healthier to come from a place of believing the person. In time, the truth will reveal itself. As you have these conversations, you will be able to discern better. But I just want to emphasize that if they really are being abused and you don't believe them, it's a tremendously more harmful to not believe a truth teller than the opposite. So that's what I would say.
Great. We actually have a couple more. So this is a common comment that we hear. It says, within my family and community, I never had any validation. I'm still having trouble in the Christian world, pastors not trained. So it's better to avoid them, it seems. It's a cold world, no validation.
Mm. Gosh, I know it's really sad that pastors do not receive mandatory training on domestic violence and emotional abuse, and just all the subtle ways that parents emotionally abuse their children and the way relationships are. They offer marriage counseling, and yet they aren't equipped to be able to identify sometimes they don't even know that emotional abuse is a form of domestic violence. They're so uneducated that they think only physical violence is domestic violence. And so I would definitely, before you reach out to any pastor, I would contact the care ministry department of a church and ask them a lot of questions about whether they have been trained in domestic violence, and really seek out a way to determine their knowledge before you confide in them. Mm-hmm. But there are some churches that have very compassionate care ministers that are willing to provide you emotional support.
Absolutely.
And we at the Men Project train churches. So if you have a church that you feel needs training, you can help implement that. And that's something that we focus on, is training faith-based leaders who are interfacing with so many victims and abusers.
Mm-hmm. I love when you say, Annette, that so often pastors are expected to know everything about everything. Where they're seen as the safe people in the church. And so people feel they can come with anything and find the help that they need. And so I love how we partner with churches in that way, with pastors, that we have a lot of compassion for that, because that's a load to carry, to have that expectation on you.
Yeah, it's true. They face every kind of crisis, and they can't be experts in all things. But I do believe that churches, when they're dealing with marriage counseling, have an obligation to be trained in domestic violence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, one more question that I have here. At what point is listening not enough? What if we're concerned that our friend is in danger? How should we handle that? Shouldn't we help them or encourage them to leave in some way?
Well, once you've established that you are a safe person and you're not talking down to the victim, because they've already been spoken down to by their perpetrator, and victims know better than anyone the safety and the danger and the complicated aspects of what it would mean to leave or to stay. They know best, and we need to respect that. We don't want to talk down to them. That's really traumatizing, because now we're talking over them. We're talking over their opinion, and they really know best. And all abuse books that advise on how to interface with victims say it's super important to not talk down to them. But you can, after you've really established that you're a safe person, you can ask, have you thought about leaving, or are you determined to stay? What are your thoughts on that? Do you have a safety plan? Can I help you provide resources? Like, so many domestic violence agencies offer a class called Personal Empowerment Program, which helps that the victims sign up for, and it helps them develop strength and clarity. And we can just, maybe have their escape plan well established, and you at your own home have an extra set of keys, their passport, their driver's license, cash in a duffel bag, some clothes, so that if they really need to get away, that they know that they can call on you to do that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's really good. It's a really good, offering a little bit of help as well. to someone who's in that situation, even being the friend who would hold that bag. Sometimes I think that, even someone who finds himself in that situation might be nervous to have that go bag or that ready bag because that might be suspicious, right?
Exactly.
So having it at someone else's home who you can trust and lean on, that's a great idea. Yeah. Thank you, Annette. So that's it for questions.
Okay. Well, thank you for being with us today. Next month, the free intensive will discuss child abuse, where we'll interview Kay Ramsey, the Executive Branch Director of Bethany Christian Services here in the West Coast. Bethany is a nonprofit organization that provides homes and services for children in foster care, as well as it helps refugees, immigrants, and children globally. The link to sign up for this intensive will be dropped in the chat box for you to see and for you to click on. And we also will be having our 4-hour, it's 2 hours, 2 days, 2 consecutive days, 2 hours each day, a virtual introductory training, which is a comprehensive training. It's not as in-depth as our 7-session curriculum, but it's very thorough, and it will be on April 28th and 29th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And the link for the introductory training will also be dropped in the chat. So don't forget to visit our website and sign up to receive information on future trainings. You can sign up to receive our blogs. We tell a lot of victim stories and describe different aspects of abuse so that you can more thoroughly understand them, and so many more offerings through our website. So go see us, and thank you for joining us today. Have a great day.